Thank you for joining DataBank for this webinar. My name is Christian. I am the Events and Sponsorship Manager for DataBank, and we're so excited to welcome you. Today, our Chief Information Security Officer, Mark Houpt, will be speaking to you about StateRAMP's shared service model for best practices that can help your organization manage risk and verify security. At the end of the webinar, we'll be opening up to a live Q&A session with Mark, so feel free to put any questions that you have into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thank you again for joining us. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mark to introduce himself, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Christian. It is my pleasure to be with you today. For those of you that do not know me, as Christian said, my name is Mark Houpt, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at DataBank. I've been with DataBank for more than 6.5 years now, which means that I've outlived most CISOs in their roles. And if you're a CISO yourself, you know that is one of the things that we all strive to do is live in an organization as long as we can, because we can have the greatest impact when we're there longer. So I've been with DataBank and its organizations for quite a while, and I hope to continue to do so and bring more of these webinars to you in the future. So as we move forward in this, one of the things that is our goal today is that it is here to inform you as our customer, as a prospective customer, about this new StateRAMP compliance option that is coming to DataBank sometime here in the latter half of 2021 and into 2022. The reason I say it's coming in the future is because StateRAMP itself is brand new. It is so new that they're still polishing things up and putting things together and putting names like DataBank onto their authorized vendor list. So our purpose here today is to inform you of what we know, because a lot of you as our customers or our prospective customers have been asking us what we know about StateRAMP and how it might apply to you and how you as an organization might get yourself prepared for doing StateRAMP as well. I believe that in the future, we're going to have other webinars that will build upon this particular presentation as things become clearer, as new information comes available from StateRAMP. So as they say, this is what the opportunity is here today. This is the current breaking news. Stand by for more. But let's go ahead and get started with what we know today so that we can get an understanding. So first of all, what is StateRAMP? Some of you may have joined us because you've seen this new term floating out there in the environment, and maybe even have heard it coming from DataBank, and you thought maybe at first it was just a joke, because a number of us in the security field have been talking about a need for StateRAMP for quite a long time. We all know about FedRAMP, which is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program that is specifically for the federal agencies and federal data. And the reason that we joked about needing StateRAMP is because FedRAMP will not allow its boundary to expand to state, local, education type of government systems. And yet those same organizations are using the very same foundational security controls that are being used by FedRAMP in order to secure their environments as well. So here we are. We've got a great organization that has stepped up and taken that name and moved it from a joke to a reality. And I'm proud and glad to see them doing that, because it really is filling a gap right now between what we do in our typical audit environments with things like the SSA 18 and the PCI audits and the HIPAA audits and things like that, and drills down specifically on what's needed for government with risk authorization. And notice I use those two terms there, audit and risk authorization. Our government friends like to look at things as a risk equation rather than, and the assessments that come from those as assessments and authorizations instead of audit. What they have is they have a realistic look on things and a realistic understanding that in fact there will always be risk out there. There will always be scenarios where nothing or where things are not perfectly secured. So what they're looking at is they're looking to understand the risk that they're getting themselves into when they use a cloud service provider, when they use a co-location services provider or another type of provider like that. So again, we're looking at risk authorization here from a state, local, education type of level. So what we know thus far is that StateRAMP is a not-for-profit organization that is not associated with the FedRAMP GSA or the FedRAMP PMO. It is a standalone organization, which is a 501c6 organization. Now, if you're familiar with those types of organizations, then you understand that a 501c6 is an educational organization. And that's really what StateRAMP continues to push out there, is education about continuous monitoring and about advancing cybersecurity. And we'll see, whenever we see how other organizations tie into StateRAMP and make it what it is, that there are external entities out there that are helping this occur, and that the StateRAMP itself is really that educational organization. So StateRAMP is also a member organization. So unlike FedRAMP, where you can submit your packages to FedRAMP, and there's really no tie between us and the federal government when we submit those packages, there is a financial tie, if you will, between the organization that becomes a member and StateRAMP. And we'll get into talking about a little bit about the costs of those as we move forward. The great news about StateRAMP is it's not just a bunch of people out there that have created a not-for-profit organization. They're hoping that it runs and flies. Actually, it's much more than that. These folks have put together a well-developed, well-thought-out program, and the state of Arizona has signed on as a founding partner in this, and they're going to either require or highly encourage. I'm going to say require because that's what I've heard, is that require any type of contract with the state of Arizona to be run through the StateRAMP program once it's fully up and operational. As a matter of fact, some of the webinars that the StateRAMP folks like Leah McGrath and others have put together have stated that they've reached out to 44 or more of the states and territories, and they're actively working with 24 of the states in one-on-one talks. So this is gaining some serious momentum within our industry and within the overall risk assessment process here. And all of this has been done within the past 6 to 8 months here in 2021 when it became open and available. And if you really wanted to take a step back into 2020 as they were putting this together. But again, this is an independent organization. It's not specifically governed or tied by one of these states. And that is a good thing for us in the security industry, much like our friends over at HITRUST have put together to help try and govern some of the HIPAA and high-tech situations. So StateRAMP, as I noted, was started in 2021 with the steering committee that began work in 2020. So if you're wondering if you're coming to the party late, you're not. In fact, you're coming to the party early by being involved in this webinar and being involved and listening to what I have to say here. Because as of right now, StateRAMP is in a building status. There is actually no authorization vendor list as of this morning. When I went to look, I went to make sure that I wasn't going to be telling you bad information as much as I could. You go to stateramp.org. And you look for the vendor list, that authorization vendor list, or what you would call the marketplace on the FedRAMP side of things, is not available yet because they're in the process of vetting the organizations that will be a part of that vendor list. So just to give you a little bit of what they've done thus far, they've done a wonderful job in Q1 of doing evangelism and outreach and announcement of what is going on with this StateRAMP. They launched that in January. They've done a number of webinars through March and April that have probably included many of you, or you've heard about those, and thus you're coming to this webinar as a result of that. Here in Q2, they also put together a tremendous effort to do a membership drive, if you will. And so they've been working on gaining members into their organization, so a member of StateRAMP is one who's paid their membership fees, had to be a part of that. And then in Q3, they're adding organizations like DataBank and potentially your organization to that authorization vendor list in order to then allow states to look at that and find out who has been through their process. So again, you're not coming to the party late. You're actually early. That AVL is not out there at this time. It's coming here later in this quarter. So as I noticed, Arizona has signed on as a founding partner, and they're heavily involved in the process and helping lead out what needs to be done, and other organizations they're in talks with. All right, so when I say StateRAMP, you need to understand that there's a lot of different organizations that are involved in this process. So we've talked about the not-for-profit StateRAMP organization, the 501c6. That is member driven and is governed by a board of directors. And that board of directors, you can go look at who that board of directors are. There's a lot of big names on there. There's names like Tony Bai, who I've known for years within the 3PAO industry. And we have CISOs from various organizations and various states, including former CISOs from the state of Michigan. The state of Arizona has a member on the board. A lot of the board members are actual state employees or people who are associated with the states in order for them to drive this. So beyond StateRAMP itself, you're looking at an organization, a company by the name of Knowledge Services out of Indianapolis, because StateRAMP itself is out of Indianapolis as well. But Knowledge Services is serving as the StateRAMP PMO. So on the FedRAMP side, the GSA has a department underneath it called the FedRAMP Program Management Office. On the StateRAMP side, that is a independent third-party entity that is doing the PMO efforts. So they do have an arbitration process and so on and so forth that we could get into later in other webinars as they develop that out. But I do know that those things exist. So there's the PMO that's tied heavily in with the not-for-profit. Then you have the third-party assessors, and those third-party assessors are the same assessors that are part of the FedRAMP assessment process. So they're used to doing this. And in fact, the StateRAMP program is piggybacking off of the A2LA 3PAO assessors list that is being used by FedRAMP. But if you are an assessor and you're on this, keep in mind that you need to become a member of StateRAMP in order to get your name listed as an assessor as well. Then underneath, on the other side of this, you have the providers. And the providers, like FedRAMP, will provide infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So DataBank is an infrastructure and a platform provider. And our name is going into that AVL. We've been staying in close contact, and we have become a member of StateRAMP. Then the other key component to making StateRAMP work here, of course, is the state, local, education, other government entities. Now, of course, the name StateRAMP really focuses in on the states being the ones that are a key part of this. But keep in mind that in our wonderful government and our systems around this country, our municipalities and our cities are very frequently independent organizations that need to be a part of this as well. Our public universities need to comply with this type of program as well, and they are typically semi-independent in their governance with their own boards and trustees and leaders within their organizations. And then there's other types of government entities that may want to come on board as well. So it's not just, StateRAMP is not just 50 states and 10 or 12 territories. We're talking literally thousands of potential entities that could be a part of this StateRAMP program from a receiver perspective in that state, local, education, other government entities type of situation. So even though state and local governments operate in similar manner as the federal side of things, using NIST 853 revision 4, because FedRAMP does not allow them to become assessed and a part of the FedRAMP process. That is one of the key reasons why we need StateRAMP right now, because there is really nothing out there that is governing this process adequately. If we don't have a single source StateRAMP type of environment, what we are going to end up with, I told you a minute ago, all those different providers, those thousands of different providers, not just the 50 states and the 10 or 12 territories out there, but literally thousands of municipalities and educational institutions and so on and so forth. What we're going to end up with literally thousands of different types of situations to comply with. StateRAMP allows us to have one type of situation, one type of set of controls and governance to comply with. So that is a key reason of why StateRAMP. Now, StateRAMP would also tell you that their whole mission is about education and making sure that we are doing our continuous monitoring, and that through that we are increasing our cybersecurity resilience. And that is another key reason for StateRAMP. They are an evangelist and a promoter of cybersecurity. And I'm sure that just by being out there and promoting this within the municipalities, within the education organizations, and even within police departments, that these types of enhancements that need to occur within these governmental agencies is only going to make our country stronger, and it's only going to make our security programs stronger as well. So StateRAMP fills a verification gap right now that did not exist previously for these organizations. I can tell you, I've talked to many of you as our customers. I've talked to people who have potentially looked at us as at DataBank as customers, and even gone to security seminars and on-site type of things for a couple of years. And one of the biggest things I hear all the time is, how can you help me get FedRAMP onto a state and local situation? So that gap is something that exists there that now we can say previously exists, that StateRAMP is going to fill. And they're going to do that with that common set of requirements and verifications through NIST 853. So we don't have to go out there and comply with literally thousands of different requirements that are out that could be out there. So what are some building blocks for StateRAMP? All right, I've already mentioned NIST 853. So right now, just like FedRAMP, we're looking at NIST 853 revision 4. So if you want to comply with StateRAMP and you want to get on board and you're not already a 53R4 shop, then you need to be looking at 3R4. As I mentioned earlier, the StateRAMP program is going to use existing ATLA 3PAOs. So you need to, if you don't already have a 3PAO, you need to have a 3PAO to assess your environment and make sure that it complies with 853 revision 4. And then another piece of the building block, again, like we talked about, is it is FedRAMP-like, but keep in mind it is not FedRAMP-like, and it is not FedRAMP, I should say. Here is where it is FedRAMP-like. It's a verify once and use many type of situation. So the idea here is that us as a provider, or you as a provider, can get on the vendor list, the authorized vendor list, and a state, a municipality can look on that list and say, DataBank or company X is on that list and they're offering this particular service. And because of that, they can then get their CIO to know that that organization meets a certain criteria, a verifiable certain criteria, and be able to sign on a contract with that organization, knowing that verifiable criteria exists. So that security assessment report will be similar to the FedRAMP type of situation as well. In fact, I have every expectation that my security assessment report that I use for FedRAMP has reciprocity and will be able to be handed over to the StateRAMP PMO for them to review it and be able to approve it. There should be no reason for me, and this is what I've heard out of the folks at StateRAMP thus far, there should be no reason for me to have a separate 3PAO assessment. Now, this is one thing that's different from some of the other federal systems that are out there. For example, there is a debate raging right now whether or not the 3PAO that conducts your assessment for FedRAMP can also provide the same SAR for CMMC for the DoD compliance, or NIST 800-171 compliance, for example. And so this here allows for that simplification of using the same SAR as we've used for FedRAMP. So those are ways that they are alike, if you will, and is a building block for StateRAMP. So another foundation or foundation number one that we want to look at is that, and make sure that we understand is, even though StateRAMP exists out there and we're assuming and we're hoping that the states will fall in line, we must understand when we go into this that even though StateRAMP exists and they have criteria, that the procurement always lies with the state or local government scenario. So what this means is that, yes, they could agree to all the StateRAMP requirements, but they could add requirements, or they can remove requirements within their RFPs, or they can they can go a different route. They can only use StateRAMP as a tool, a verification tool, but not the final verification tool, for example. So this is one of the things that we, as part of that 5-group community of the PMO and the 3 PAOs and the providers, StateRAMP itself as a not-for-profit, and the services that are going to be used by the states and local governments. This is one of the things that we can work together in the future to kind of iron out and solidify a little bit. But as of right now, the procurement always lies with the state or local government and the decision maker, the CIO, that's there. So yes, not to shade it any, StateRAMP is really only advising and voluntary for the states. But let me tell you, it is a good set of advice, and it is a good voluntary thing to sign up for these organizations. So we must also, with that, understand that every state is different. So foundation number 2 is that there are some differences between FedRAMP and StateRAMP and the way we speak about those, that in particular about the levels that are used. So inside of StateRAMP, level 1 or impact level 1 is equal to FedRAMP low. And impact level or level 3 is equal to FedRAMP moderate. And FedRAMP moderate is as high as they're going to go right now, to my understanding. The FedRAMP high and a higher impact level may be something that they work on a little bit later. Now, you notice I skipped over level 2 because they did apply in there, and the StateRAMP folks and Leah and team have a great webinar that discusses why they've chosen to have a level 2 that's in between the moderate and low, because there are some entities and agencies out there where low isn't good enough and moderate is too heavy. So low plus custom controls or moderate minus custom controls is an option for a provider or an entity, an agency to accept. Now, the cool thing is that the StateRAMP is putting together a lot of documentation, a lot of tools that will help us determine where we fall inside of that. So I can tell you right off the bat that with PII, PHI, or even some GIS data, we're probably going to fall into that level 3 category without question. But when we start looking at level 2 and level 1, we might need to have some tools that will help us. So StateRAMP has developed a data classification tool that you can go and get off of their website and work with. So keep in mind that there's no FedRAMP high equivalency right now. But that may or may not come in the future. I have a feeling that it probably will. There will probably be a demand for it. But also keep in mind that a lot of FedRAMP high type of situations are national security related situations or things along that type of line that a state or local entity might not be dealing with, or they may have to comply with federal controls, whether they like it or not, because the source of the data is federal in that particular case. So data, the source of the data and data itself is what rules here. Use the data classification tool or help your teams use the data classification tool. So foundation number 3 is that StateRAMP uses status indicators for the providers that are out there. So active means that the provider is a member. So in other words, we paid our membership fee. We've engaged a 3 PAO, but we're not yet in that ready status. And the ready status is very much like the FedRAMP ready status, meaning you've gone through a minimal assessment. A 3 PAO has used a minimal set of controls and identified that you met those controls. Now, I talked about cost a little bit ago. It's not on the sheet here, but becoming a member is a simple $500 annual fee. It is not a lot of money considering what this organization is doing for us, all the documentation they're putting together, the advocacy they're doing, and bringing these 4 or 5 groups together under one umbrella. So membership is about $500. Now we move on to a pending status, and that means that the provider, again, is a member. They've engaged a 3PO and achieved a ready status. So they've gone through a baseline set of controls, and they've been able to pass that type of situation. And in process status, again, means that they're a member. They have a sponsor this time. So just like FedRAMP, you need to have an agency or a entity sponsor, a government entity that will sponsor you. And trust me, I'm certain that underneath StateRAMP, the entities are going to be much more interested in sponsoring us than under FedRAMP. I'm sure that many of you, like myself, have had a lot of challenges with getting federal agencies to be a sponsor. They want to piggyback off of everybody else's stuff because they know that CIO is ultimately responsible for what happens inside of our environments in the cloud whenever they sponsor that. I'm certain that these will be much easier, especially with StateRAMP helping with evangelizing the need for that. So again, in process goes on. They have an in process entity has a 3PAO and a SAR is close, or they have a SAR in hand. And then, although I haven't seen it actually communicated yet, but I'm assuming that authorized means that the in-process organization has moved beyond that and has actually been assessed by the PMO at StateRAMP and has gotten an authorization from that PMO, or a good thumbs up, if you will, that they meet the control set. Now, again, the costs on this. So moving into a pending status is and don't take this for gospel, because I am not part of StateRAMP. They have the right to change these numbers. But last time the numbers I saw was the pending and in process. It was about $2,500 per product, not per organization, but per product. And then once you move into the authorization status, you move up to a $5,000 level of where, and what you're paying for there is you're paying for the PMO to assess. So you're basically paying for consulting fees for them to assess your SAR and make sure that it meets the criteria that's necessary. They're basically recouping their costs on that. And again, those are costs you would have to look on their website when they finally publish those as to what those look like. All right, so what does the process for becoming a StateRAMP authorized look like? This is just an overview. So, DataBank being a provider, we would become a member of StateRAMP, and I'm going to tell you proudly that we did that this past spring. So we have checked that box. We are a member. We would engage a 3PAO if we don't already have one, and DataBank does already have one because we are a FedRAMP authorized entity. So our 3PAO and our SAR is already done. We would then go and we would obtain a sponsor. All right. And so the sponsorship would be any of those state, local, education type of entities that wants to use our product. If we don't have a sponsor, then we could still move through the process and we can complete the ready package and get our name on the AVL as a ready or in process type of entity. Once we receive the sponsor and we submit our SAR, then we would move through the process to get and receive an authorization or a provisional authorization. This is one of the things I love about StateRAMP, is that you can get provisional authorizations, whereas in FedRAMP it's very difficult and very nebulous as to whether you can or cannot. On the DoD side, they have the authority to test, or a PATO, a provisional ATO with the JAB. But with StateRAMP, you can actually get a provisional authorization to get the system up and running, and get it moving, and get your name on that AVL in that manner. So let's take a look at what each of these authorized or ready status means when we dig a little bit deeper into that. So if you are meeting the baseline requirements and you're in that ready status, you've completed about 59 controls from the NIST 853. You have a very clear and completed diagram for your boundary. You have a very clear and completed inventory worksheet and a roles and permissions matrix. So this, again, is very much like a FedRAMP ready status. For an authorization or a provisional authorization, you're going to be using the level 1. You're going to have 115 controls that you need to comply with, or level 3, you've got to go all the way to moderate at 325 controls. Now remember, if you're at level 2, you would go to level 1 and add controls, or potentially level 3 and subtract controls, up to the liking of your customer. Your documentation is 100% complete. Your SAR is complete, or in a provisional state, it is relatively complete. Maybe you've got it done, but there's a few things that you need to go back and retest for whatever reason. You have a state sponsor, or an education law local entity type of sponsor, and the StateRAMP PMO is probably reviewing your authorization request at this given time. Again, a lot of this documentation is available to you on the stateramp.org website, and they are building their library. You can go look at this and take a look at it there. So one of the questions that people always ask me about FedRAMP is, how long does it take to get this status? And so I'm sure that's a question with a lot of you folks as well. So my answer with FedRAMP is always 12 to 18 months. And I'm proud to announce, and I'm happy to announce, that I believe it's going to be faster under StateRAMP. And that's not because it's less secure. That's not because of anything against FedRAMP. I believe that it is this way because it is a private sector type of situation, and they can move a little bit more quickly. They could be a little bit more nimble. And I do know that the StateRAMP folks have taken some common sense and applied to some of the areas that we struggle with the FedRAMP side of things, and are able to overcome those. So that's one of the balances, or one of the good things about being a not-for-profit type of situation, is that you have that freedom and ability to make some of those choices. So from what I've heard, obviously nobody's gone through this process yet, but from what I've heard is to get to the FedRAMP or StateRAMP ready status take about 6 months, and about 12 months to reach a full authorization status. Now, of course, this will be different for everyone depending on how mature your organization is and how far you are along. I believe for DataBank, that we are going to be able to move to that authorization status fairly quickly, because we already have a SAR. We have a lot of the legwork that's already done. All we need is a customer that has a state sponsor that's willing to step up to the plate and sign off on that. And I know that StateRAMP will help us with that, because they've said it in writing and they said it on their webinars that they will help with that. They'll help be that interface and help evangelize and educate the state and local governments about who they are and why it's important to be a part of that. So, but do keep in mind this: if you have not done a SAR, if you have not gone through this 3PAO process, just the testing on that 3PAO process alone takes you 3 months to get through. Literally, their process, their checklist will take 3 months to get through. So you can look at 6 to 12 month period for somebody who's starting from scratch to get to an authorization type of situation. So one of the things I think is important for us to understand of what StateRAMP can't do at this time, and this is my assessment of what they cannot do based on what I've heard through webinars and what I've seen missing from documentation, even heard on Q&A type of sessions. So some of this may be wrong, or they may have matured beyond this, or in the process of maturing beyond it. But let me tell you what I've identified that they can't do, and maybe never be able to do, because some of these things are not things that they would do anyway. So currently, as I said, there's no equivalent for FedRAMP High. And again, that's because it's a lot of national security type of data and classified data that's involved. Typically, when that's given to a state and local government type of entity, that is still governed by its original source at the federal side. And so it wouldn't apply anyway. So that is one area that they may never attain, or if they do, it will be a modified type of situation. But we'll see where it goes. I don't believe right now, and this is purely my opinion, but I don't believe that CJIS or the Criminal Justice Information Service type of data is going to be able to go through StateRAMP at this time. But I believe it's something they can mature into as they work through it. Now, keep in mind that CJIS has really no certification anyway. And CJIS is, even though it's a federal FBI program, every entity within the states, and even sometimes localized law enforcement entities, have governance over their own CJIS data. So it really is ripe for StateRAMP to be involved in CJIS data. But it is one thing that I think is sitting on the question table right now as to when or if we go that direction and get CJIS data as part of the StateRAMP authorization. One of the things I've not heard about is how to deal with ITAR data. But again, that is typically a federal government type of situation, although there are a lot of manufacturers out there that work with state entities where ITAR data it does apply. So personal opinion, again, is I don't believe ITAR data will ever be a part of StateRAMP because it's fully governed by the federal side of things and it's fully governed by the State Department. And so really it's outside of the realm of StateRAMP to begin with, but who knows? We'll have to see where it matures and where it goes. And like the rest of us, CMMC is maturing itself, and I believe that they are looking and waiting to see how CMMC matures to determine whether or not and how they would handle CMMC data within StateRAMP. But again, we're dealing with something here that is currently Department of Defense and potentially will never be outside of that being a federal responsibility and federal data. So it's possible that CMMC and StateRAMP might get together and they have some sort of reciprocity or something along those lines. But again, it's a wait and see type of situation. But again, I want to stress these are my opinions based upon my research of what I'm seeing out there right now, and I could be completely wrong on this. And I'm happy to be wrong on that because any of these that are covered as part of StateRAMP only makes the program stronger and better. All right, so let's start wrapping up here. What will DataBank offer under StateRAMP? So I would say that, first of all, I want to be, as a CISO at DataBank, I want us to be a leader in this. And I have tried to respectfully be a leader by not only doing this type of webinar and evangelizing StateRAMP and giving people the information that's out there, but we also have a podcast that was done with Leah and Noah from the StateRAMP and the StateRAMP PMO. So I got the executive director of StateRAMP, and I got the leader, the CISO over at Knowledge Services, who is running the PMO, to come on a podcast that we did this past spring. And had sat down and had an hour-long discussion, or a little more than an hour-long discussion with them about this program. So if you want to hear straight from them where they are at that given point with StateRAMP, I encourage you to go to the DataBank podcast and look for CISO Corner. And the CISO Corner podcast, the most recent one that we've released, is about StateRAMP. Go and listen to that and listen directly what they've told us. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that I had a co-host on that, and Harvey Seal with Mimecast. He's a great partner and helped me through that podcast. So we're going to continue to try and be a leader in this. DataBank is a member and will continue to be a member of StateRAMP, and which is right now all we can be. We are discussing with them, and we are moving forward with an email we received just yesterday, as a matter of fact, of putting our name and our products onto the authorized vendor list. And that's what StateRAMP is working on right now. They opened it up for companies like DataBank, like yours, to submit our SARs and other packages to gain that on the marketplace on the AVL. So we are going to continue to lead in those ways, and any way that I possibly can, I'll keep you up to date as partners, as potential customers, and also continue to evangelize this great program that we have in StateRAMP. So how can DataBank help you as our customers? Here's how I envision that we can help you as our customers, and that is keeping you informed, like this particular webinar. Very beginning of this, I said, hey, I think this is going to be one of the type of webinars where we do building blocks, and we have more of these types of things as it becomes more clear, as new information comes out. So stay tuned. We intend to have more of these. I can point you towards where their documents are, so you don't just hear it from me. You can go to where their documents are. And if you go out on stateramp.org, they have their document library out there that's being built, and it is quite an extensive library right now. If you need to, if you have questions, I can help facilitate discussions between StateRAMP and your organization. or potentially I can provide you generalized guidance on how to prepare your organization based upon our experiences with FedRAMP, being that they are so closely tied, but yet not tied together. The processes are tied, but the organizations are not tied. So we can help you through this and provide you generalized guidance. And I can give you contact information for 3PAOs if you do not have a 3PAO. So as we move into questions, I want you to hear me clearly state this. StateRAMP is a great program. It is going to be greater as they develop and mature and move on and make their product out there in the market and as they evangelize it. This is going to be something that you want to be in on from the ground floor. You're not too late right now. Jump in. Let's do this together, and hopefully we can move forward as partners. So I'm going to turn it back over to Christian and see if there's any questions. If you have questions that aren't answered here, you can always email me as well. It's on the screen.
Thank you so much, Mark. Such great information. We do have a few questions, so I'm going to go ahead and read them to you. This first question is a multiple part question, so I'll read the whole question out loud. If a cloud solution has a StateRAMP status of authorized, that means the 3PAO determined the solution to be 100% compliant with requirements, correct?
That is my understanding. Yes, that is correct.
Perfect.
Unless, and let me add this, unless there's and there probably will be a POAM or a plan of actions and milestones list that comes with that assessment. So when I say 100% compliant, meaning we're compliant, but there may be some steps we need to take in order to better our situation.
Great. Should agencies still have a process to perform independent reviews of the packages?
That is entirely up to the agencies, but I would recommend that they partner with StateRAMP and the StateRAMP PMO to follow their process to evaluate the packages. It is only fitting that a state, local education type of entity does review the package before they put their data or they put their program out inside of a cloud provider. As a CISO of a state, local education type of environment, I would make sure that I reviewed the package just like I would review a SSA 18 or other type of audit document to make sure that that things are what that organization says they are and they're maintaining the standards they need to maintain.
Great, thank you. How about for a solution with a StateRAMP provisional status?
What do you mean by that question?
It says agencies should have a process in place to review the 3PAO identified risks, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes. And even for a provisional status organization, they should still have those. A provisional status scenario should at least have a draft SAR or some sort of document that could be provided to the agency, to the entity before they sign contracts in order to do at least a preliminary assessment or a provisional assessment, shall we say, of where that organization stands.
Awesome, thank you. Moving on to the next question. Why PayPal? Is that the sole means of payment for membership?
That is not a question that I can answer because that's an organizational question for StateRAMP. So I will pass that question on to Leah and her team. I can just purely guess that PayPal is probably the easiest way, but you know, certainly I'll pass that question along to them.
Great. If a SaaS company hosts with DataBank, what additional controls are required to be StateRAMP L3 authorized?
Okay, so keep in mind that in order to be level 3 authorized, you have to meet the moderate standard, which is 325 controls. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that you need to meet all 325 controls in each of those statuses, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So if DataBank is offering the IaaS and the PaaS, DataBank will meet all 325 of those controls. And when I say meet that, they will respond to that in their system security plan or their SSP. Now, meeting that may be not applicable, or it may be that it is passed on to the SaaS provider, or it may be that you actually have control sets in place to address that. So when it comes to the SaaS provider, they have to address all 325 of those controls. Now, because the SaaS lives on top of the infrastructure and the platform, the IaaS and the PaaS, what they may be doing is they may be inheriting the controls, many of the controls, from the IaaS and the PaaS provider. So at DataBank, we believe, depending on the application, but we believe that it is typical that we handle up to 85, and I said up to, not necessarily, but up to 85% of those 325 controls. So that leaves 15 to a little bit more inside of a PaaS, SaaS type of environment that the customer needs to handle in SaaS. But again, they will still have to answer for all 325. So their answer on a majority of those, on 80 or 85% of those, may be inherited from provider. But they still have to answer for that when they go through the 3PAO process. Now, also keep in mind that it may be that both organizations have to provide independent answers. One of the key places where that occurs is on a security awareness and training. Both organizations have to have it. The SaaS provider cannot inherit the security awareness and training from what the PaaS and the IaaS provider does. We both have to do that simultaneously. On the flip side of that, your SaaS provider cannot independently on their own do physical and environmental controls. Those are solely on the IaaS and PaaS provider. So that's one of those places where the SaaS provider would answer not applicable, inherited from IaaS and PaaS provider. So I know that's a very technical answer, but I want to make sure that gets out there, because it can confuse people and can get to the point where people believe they only have to do a certain amount, and then they get down to the wire and realize that they have to do a little bit more in order to satisfy their 3PAO.
Great. So a related question that came through was, how can service providers that offer IaaS and PaaS partner with SaaS providers to put forth a consolidated package to the states?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's a couple of different ways to do that, but probably the easiest way to do that is have some sort of a teaming agreement between the two organizations. So, for example, if DataBank provides IaaS and PaaS and a partner is providing an FTP service as the SaaS, we may create a teaming agreement where we would sell the entire package, and on our entry in the AVL, the authorized vendor list, both organizations would show that FTP SaaS layered on top of the IaaS and the PaaS. So we can go at it, but really the bottom line is it becomes a sales conversation and a business to business type of agreement that needs to be accomplished. And then whenever the 3PAO comes into test, the IaaS and PaaS provider needs to make sure that their SSP is updated to include the SaaS environment, and the assessment includes the SaaS environment as well. And that's how we get through that process.
Great, thank you. Is the $5,000 for authorized level a one-time or annual fee?
Okay, my understanding is because it is an annual fee, because just like FedRAMP, StateRAMP will have an annual requirement for continuous monitoring, and therefore your package, your SAR, is put before the StateRAMP PMO on an annual basis. Again, remember that fee is really to pay for the review and assessment of your SAR. And by the PMO. It's not money that goes into the coffers, if you will, of StateRAMP like the $500 membership fee does. It is actually transactional, meaning you pay the money and you get back an assessment of your SAR. So I believe, I'm certain that it's annual, and at least as of last I heard, it's certain that it's annual, and it's just, it's part of cost of doing business, if you will.
Great. Are states required to join StateRAMP?
No, they are not. And that is certainly a challenge that StateRAMP knows about. It's been discussed in other Q&A type of situations that I've listened to and been a part of. But no, they are not. And that's why one of my slides showed that, the StateRAMP team have evangelized to 44 different states and territories, but only 24 of them they're in one-on-one conversations with. So one of the things you can do to help evangelize this is if you know state and local governments, is you can inform them of this program and the value of this program and be able to get them on board with this. But no, there is no requirement. This is a not-for-profit voluntary organization. But is one that I think is very much needed within our industry. It's really nice to have a self-governed type of situation instead of like we do with PCI DSS or we do with HITRUST. Being able to self-regulate and self-govern within this industry is a key to our success going forward. Last thing we need is Washington or someone else dictating to us how we have to do this, because if we do that, then we do lose some of the flexibility, and we get again, not trying to knock FedRAMP, but we get FedRAMP where there are some things that come out of FedRAMP that you just scratch your head about and go, that is not really security. That is really not risk authorization or risk assessment either. It's just somebody that's reacting to a situation. And I believe StateRAMP remaining independent and remaining a not-for-profit governed by a board of governors will allow for that flexibility and that independence to continue.
Great, thank you. And this may be a StateRAMP focused question. The FedRAMP program has been in place for nearly a decade and now have only 225 assets authorized. And there are 12,000 to 14,000 providers to the government.
Right.
So they are missing out on innovative companies. Do we know if StateRAMP has taken this into consideration to make it easier for companies to authorize and exist on the marketplace?
Yes, and that has been verbally talked about and very clearly identified as one of the goals of StateRAMP is to be, again, much more flexible, much more easy to get in on, they call it the on-ramp, much easier to be an on-ramp to StateRAMP than what the federal government is. So you are correct. The FedRAMP program has been around actually 10 years this year. 2011 is when it came out. And you're correct on the numbers, or very close to those numbers last time I saw them. And I firmly believe that StateRAMP, if we're 10 years into StateRAMP and they have half the success that I believe that they can have, the numbers will be in the thousands, not in the 200 and 300 range, because this group is governed by a board of people that know that innovation is important, and that getting the more that's gotten more organizations that are a part of StateRAMP and membership in StateRAMP, the more that we can do to govern ourselves.
Great. So we just have a couple more questions before the end of the webinar. The next question I have, will StateRAMP authorization packages include a breakdown of responsibilities between the cloud service provider and the customer or agency, similar to how FedRAMP details who's responsible for each control?
I have looked at some of their documentation, and that exists already. I believe that documentation will mature even further. So simple answer is yes. I can see that happening. I don't see it as being successful without it. But I do believe that it will mature even further for that allowance.
Great. And the last question that I have is, HITRUST is a third-party security certification program for healthcare data. It sounds like StateRAMP is trying to do the same thing, only in the state and local government levels. Is this accurate?
I would say that the model that HITRUST followed, as well as PCI DSS, is being followed to some degree. At least the thought process is being followed by StateRAMP. I believe all three of them have a desire to be a not-for-profit organization that is looking at continuous monitoring and looking at promoting cybersecurity in general. I believe that StateRAMP probably has a little bit better of a mindset in the sense that they're looking to educate people about cybersecurity as their primary mission, whereas some of the other organizations, they're not wrong, they just have a different focus. They're not just about organizations. I like the model that StateRAMP has done where they've had a third another party be the PMO, whereas HITRUST and PCI DSS, for example, in particular HITRUST, they maintain all of their certification efforts within their organization, and there's not a lot of transparency in that. With StateRAMP, we'll see that transparency because of that third-party PMO that's out there.
Great. And I had another question come through. You mentioned that there is FedRAMP reciprocity. Help me understand. Will I have to have my 3PAO do something to provide this reciprocity?
That's a really good question that I'm waiting to hear the full answer on myself. And I've asked the question, and that's being worked out through this AVL scenario. Here's what I know, and that is this: that if we have FedRAMP ATOs, that those will be heavily considered and be accepted by the StateRAMP PMO in that process. Now, what we will have to do is we will still have to get a state agency, I believe, we'll still have to get a state agency to sponsor us. The question remains whether or not the full reciprocity will exist and it will be accepted because there's a federal agency that is sponsoring the FedRAMP ATO, or whether they're going to absolutely require a state agency to be a sponsor, even though everything else is already done before we can be fully authorized. So that's the part that's open. Otherwise, reciprocity, I believe, is going to be full.
Great. I had one last question and then we can wrap up. FedRAMP is a really hard program to comply with, in part because you have to have a federal agency to sponsor you. They tend to be stingy with the ATOs. Do we need an ATO with StateRAMP?
Well, the answer is yes, because really an ATO is authorization, and it is an agency that is sponsoring you. Okay, so yes, the federal side is very stingy with them, and I've mentioned a couple of reasons why. FISMA, which is really the heart of where FedRAMP comes from, requires that CIOs of each agency sign off on an annual basis to the security controls that they have applied to their entire security suite, not just what's in the not what's just in the FedRAMP side or the cloud side. But there's a lot of CIOs out there that are unwilling to take the risk of signing off on something that's not within their four walls on the federal side. I believe that through the evangelism and the promotion that StateRAMP is going to do, that we're going to be able to overcome that on the StateRAMP side, and we're not going to have a situation where the CIO of the city of Chicago, for example, the CIO of the city of Los Angeles, or even the IT manager of the city of Lincoln, Illinois, is going to be stingy about issuing an authority or an authorization to operate and sponsor that StateRAMP authorization. Now, what will be probably on the flip side of that is that those authorizations may be easier to revoke on the StateRAMP side than they are on the federal side as well. But quite frankly, on the federal side, the CIO could just choose not to sign off on it anymore and not even notify you, and you lose your ATO. So bottom line is, I believe it's going to be easier to get, and not easier from a technical perspective, but easier from a signature perspective, to get the authorization and the equivalent of an ATO on the StateRAMP side, because I think that there's a better evangelism effort that's going on with StateRAMP.
Great. So I think that brings us to the end of our questions. Did you have any additional comments that you wanted to make to wrap up the webinar?
Probably my my caveat that I started off with, this is a moving target. I'll just say it in a different way. It's a moving target. It's something that these folks are building, and they're still in the process of building. You're not too late if you haven't joined yet. There is no authorization vendor list out there yet. It's coming here in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. So you're not too far behind, but things could change, and I'll just make sure we have more webinars like this to update people as we move forward.
Great, yes, and related to that, we will have some additional events coming up, so please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. We post additional webinars as well as in-person events. You can also find upcoming events on our website, databank.com, under the events link. And please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. Thank you so much to Mark Houpt for talking to us about StateRAMP today. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.